How's it going, everybody? My name is Ron Sparkman, and I am the Chief Curiosity Correspondent for the Space Foundation Discovery Center, and welcome to Space4U Live. Today, our guest is the birthday girl herself, Rose DF, and we're so glad to have her on, especially on her birthday. We were actually going to do this on May 4th and do Star Wars, and then I realized that her birthday was coming up, and we thought this would be a great day to be able to do it. So Rose is a science communicator, and she is also starting ASU, and she will be studying observational and experimental astrophysics and cosmology. That is a mouthful. So, Rose, welcome to the show today, and a very special happy birthday.
Hi, thank you.
Well, we're glad to have you. So we're just going to start firing off the questions. And the first one is that we always like to ask everybody is, what was your inspiration for space and science?
The romanticism. Okay. Well, mine was, I guess, the moon. By now, a lot of people know that already because when I was back where I was born and raised in the Dominican Republic, we used to have a lot of blackouts pretty much almost every night. And all we had was moonlight. And since I didn't know what the moon was or anything, I wasn't really allowed to have a proper education. My education was more based on things that you do to become a wife. So I didn't know anything at all. Like, in my opinion, I knew nothing. All I got was like basic math that you can use to count how many potatoes you're going to cook. So I used to look at the moon and be really confused about what it was. And because I never got answers to anything, I got really frustrated. And then I became kind of obsessed with it. And that turned into love. And here I am.
I love the fact that you are a moon evangelist because that's something I myself I love to do. We had Deep Sky dude on a couple weeks ago, and he and I have a tendency to do a lot of the moon casts, and it's he refers to himself as a lunatic, because that's kind of where the word came from, and he loves it's so detailed, and I'm glad that that's something that really inspired you. And so it's a big jump to go from I love the moon to what you're doing now. So what was the impetus for you to start getting into this field and studying and what you're doing now?
You mean how I got in? Or
yeah. So like you love space, you love science, and now it's something that you become a science communicator. What was that shift that said this is where I'm going to move into this field?
Well, because I didn't really know that we have fields and that you could study this stuff or that women did it or whatever. I kind of went a lot of my life. Well, I mean, I know I look really young, whatever, but I went a lot of my life completely clueless about this stuff. So I kind of just did what I thought I was supposed to do. I went ahead and I married young and whatever, and I went through hell. And then while I was living on the streets in New York City, I think I was sleeping at train stations and stuff. One of the things I noticed is that I kept thinking about it. I kept thinking about the moon, and I wanted to know what was up there and all that kind of stuff. So that kind of made me realize that I really wanted to study that. So with time, I worked enough that I got myself off the streets and put myself in college. But like I said, I didn't know anything. So I just wanted to take science classes. I went in there super naive. I was just like, oh, I want to do science. And that was not how it goes. So I started kind of learning from there, like with all the struggles and all the roads you have to take. And I kind of taught myself pretty much everything up until the point where I got myself to where I need to be right now. It was just a lot of reading, a lot of listening, a lot of trial and error. I got hit by a car in 2017, and that's when I was already off the streets, working for a good company and saving to put myself through school to do this. So while I was recovering, I was kind of losing it. So I had this old Twitter account that somebody told me to open because they said that if you didn't have a Twitter, you didn't exist. I opened that and I was just in there talking, and I realized you could talk to scientists and all this stuff. And I started getting in touch with people, learning from people. And when I started talking about my experiences, I guess what was normal for me, all the struggle, a lot of people, I guess, didn't know that happens. So I saw it as an opportunity. I was like, oh, so not everyone in science comes from the same place or the same spot, or it's not as easy for everyone. So I started putting it out there, and it grew from there.
And I think that's one of the powerful things about it. There's a lot of rough things about social media. But the one thing that's really great about it is that you can see something like on Twitter of, this is what a scientist looks like. And you can see that that's one of the things that I'm really particular about, is just showing the breadth of what space and science can look like. When I first started this, I had never seen anybody that looked like me. I was well into my 30s when I fell in love with this. I had tattoos. I have a bunch of piercings. There's a bunch of stuff that made me stand out, and I didn't know if there was going to be a place for me. And I started seeing more and more people because of social media that didn't look like what I thought a scientist was going to look like because of what we see on TV and stuff. So I think that's a really important thing. And I know that's something that you take very, very seriously, is working in science communication. So can you talk a little bit about how you went from sharing your story to sharing science, which you do such a great job of, and kind of what your role is in that as a science communicator, especially on space Twitter, for instance?
I think people were the ones who gave me the title. I never saw myself as a science communicator, more like I try to make people remember that I'm doing this for me, because I think the more you grow in social media, the more people forget. So as much as I love sharing what I love, it was always about me. It was always my dream, what I like. And I noticed how frustrating and how sad it was for me not knowing things and wanting to ask people, or even asking people, and being treated like, I don't know, being kind of humiliated, almost ridiculed for not knowing things. That kind of gave me the fuel, because I was like, okay, there's a lot of people out there who are probably in my same situation, or some people who will never get anywhere near the things that they love. They don't have information. So I always feel like if I can help anyone, or I can answer a question or whatever, as long as it's done respectfully, I want to be there for that person, because I didn't have that. And that's where the whole science communicator came about. It wasn't something that I just decided, oh, I'm going to be a science guy. I didn't even know what that was 2 years ago. Hell, I learned what a PhD was like about 2.5 years ago.
No, that's credible. And you're doing a wonderful job with that, getting out all the different things that you do. And so let's talk a little bit about what you're studying, which is such a mouthful, and I love it. So you're at ASU, and you're studying observational and experimental astrophysics and cosmology. Like, if there was ever something that probably needed a shorthand, it might be that. So can you tell us a little bit about what that is for people that may not know? We got a lot of like kids, families, and stuff listening that are interested in it, but a lot of these terms are kind of big and scary, right? I know that they were to me, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to dive into it, and start communicating science. So can you tell us about what that is, and what you want to do once you're in that field?
Okay, so that's basically an amalgamation of some of the main things. Like, you usually hear astrophysics or cosmology, and that encompasses a lot of stuff. So I realized really early on, when I figured out I wanted to do this stuff, that I like visuals, all the beautiful pictures that we see, like the image that you have on your background, the Hubble image. I like that. So as much as I wanted to learn about the universe and figure out where things came from, how they form, how it came to be, I also like the imaging. So that's basically the observational part of that, where you take the data that comes from some of the probes that we have out there, and you translate that into the images that people see, that people love. And then you have the cosmology aspect and the astrophysics aspect, which is, you learn the origins of the universe, you learn how things came to be, how stars form, how galaxies do what they do, everything in between. Yeah.
And it's such a fascinating, because that's what I want to go to school for. Like, it's astronomy. Astronomy is my love and my passion, and it's amazing that we're starting to see more and more people. And I know that you're talking a little bit about being a science communicator and being out there. And I know that in astronomy and cosmology in particular, you were shocked to find out that you were really one of the main people out there that's Dominican, that's talking about this kind of stuff, especially when it comes to like Twitter and your profile. So women in STEM, being from where you're from, representing that group. What does it mean to you to be able to be out there and do what you're doing? And what is it that's that matters the most about that, of being that type of representation for people that may have felt that they didn't have that?
I've been told by a lot of people that there's no point to bringing that up. Just like a lot of people say there's no point to bringing up that I used to be homeless, or that I came from abuse, or anything like that. But I've also been told by a lot of people who, I guess, didn't make it, or had those dreams, and felt too intimidated by it, or they had a teacher or someone at some point that humiliated them for not knowing something and they kind of gave up, that what I'm doing is important, because when they saw me, they felt like, wow, so I'm not alone. So that kind of gave me the push of continue to mention that, just because I realized that it is important. I mean, I didn't know I was rare until people started telling me that I was. So I don't know any, like, I know maybe one other Dominican woman that's in Astro, and I learned about her about a year ago. But I think as known ones are, I'm the only one out there that I know of.
And that's an incredible thing, is that, I think that's something that is more important than people realize. It's the people that have representation that may not understand that that's important for those that haven't seen it before. And I know that it's something that's really important, especially for us, is the inclusivity and the diversity of showing all the different voices and faces that are out there, because everybody needs somebody to be able to connect to. If you see an example of what you want to do, then it's easier for you to say, well, I know I can do that because that person reminds me of me. It's why I think it's such an important thing. And it's great that we have you out there doing all these incredible things. And we mentioned a little bit earlier that there's not a whole lot of people that are on social media that love and share the moon in ways that you and I do. And I love the fact that you're a moon evangelist and you're always getting people, interested in it. Just very much like, some months ago, I talked to Serafina Nance on a talk, and she's always talking about, supernovas and going out and looking up. And I think that's an important thing. So is it something that you purposely want to do when you're putting stuff out there, that you want to get people to do that? Or you're just saying, I love the moon and you should love it too?
It started that way, where I was just sharing the fact that I love it. And then I started seeing people saying, oh, wow, I never really take the time to look up. And that made me so happy, because when I look up, I've said it before, when I look up, it just, nothing matters, even if it's for a little bit. Especially the way things are, right? Like, I'm somebody, again, that had a pretty tough life. So I had to find comfort in anything I could find it. And that was my comfort. Me looking up, me seeing the moon, that was my comfort. And to this day, that's what it is. So when I see people tag me all the time. Whenever they're out seeing the moon, oh, I thought of you because I looked at the moon. And it just makes me so happy. If I'm going to be remembered for anything, that's the best way. It is the best way.
It's one of those things that's easy to forget too. We've seen it so much, and the thing is that people want to be excited by space and science. We talk about supermoons, and it's not really that big of a deal. But the thing is that when everybody's being told it's a big deal, they want to go out and look up at it. But every single full moon is a beautiful thing to look at, and really, so are every other phase of the moon. There's nothing like looking through a telescope, a really nice telescope, and seeing the darkness of the moon in comparison to the part that's reflecting the sunlight, right? And you see the Terminator line, and you can see so many more details because of the shadows and stuff in it. And I think it's something that we're going to be doing more of, is actually doing virtual star parties, on our platforms, because it's something we want people to see. And you can see a lot of this stuff that's the deep sky stuff that's really, really cool, but there's that dynamic to it when you look through a telescope and you see the atmosphere moving and clouds pass by, that it makes it all that much more real. And I think that's the reason why the moon is so important. And even, going out and pointing out to somebody that, hey, that's, you see that in the sky, what do you think that is? Oh, that's this star. No, that's Venus, or that's Mars. And I think those things are important. And I'm glad that it's something that you're putting out there. Is there anything, so besides the moon, is there anything else that you think that you love to talk about with people that kind of gets them inspired about space that maybe you were surprised by?
Everything.
Everything.
I talk about Hubble a lot just because of the images that we've gotten, because for me, that blew my mind. Growing up, I thought that we only had the sun and us and the moon, and that's as big as the universe was for me. So as I started finding out more things, it just kind of blew my mind. So it's really hard for me, and that's been probably one of the toughest parts about picking an area of interest, having to focus on something, because I just love all of it. I mean, when you think about it, you don't even have to like space to acknowledge the fact that this is huge. I mean, we're part of this universe that we barely understand. So
yeah, and I agree with you completely. I mean, that's a big piece of what we look at with the cosmic perspective of you have this attachment to we have this attachment to something, and I think we find it so much with people that that love space, is that when you get it and you realize that, like there's a very popular shirt that I have that you can get at pretty much, any museum or discovery center like ours, where it's got the entire Milky Way galaxy. It says, if you're having a tough day, just remember you are here. Your star is here, not just you. Like, you can't even see it. We've got this really amazing image that we put on the Science on a Sphere. And as it goes around, it's the Milky Way galaxy. And it's like our star system is so small, you can't even point it out. So we have to have something that points to Alpha Centauri. Be like, we are so small, you can't see us on this, but here's the next biggest star and look how small it is. And that's just for this galaxy alone. And I think that's such a major thing for people is to that we forget sometimes, and we get kind of wrapped up in all the things that are going on, that, you're on a, tiny speck of dust just, floating through the universe, one of, countless billions. And it helps when we're going through tough times like we are now, which I think is a really, really great thing. And again, it's one of the reasons that it's so important that we have people out there that are doing what you're doing. So what is your favorite thing about the universe? Like that is always mind blowing. If somebody hears it, they're just like, okay, that's incredible. I didn't know that.
The fact that you can take a tiny patch of sky and find like 10,000 galaxies in just that one tiny patch. And that, to me, that's just ridiculous. Like, I can try to make it sound very technical, and I can get very scientific about it, but I'm going to call it what it is. It's ridiculous. It tells you just how small we are. I mean, I use this stuff, and I've said it a million times in other interviews. I use this stuff for perspective, and I love reminding people just how small we are, because we forget that all the time. And that's the mind-blowing part about it.
I love it. And so it looks like we got a question coming in. This one comes from Josie. And Josie, I still have yet to ever attempt your last name, but she's always on asking us questions. And she says, what factors do you believe contributed to your resilience? And thank you so much for sharing your stories and experience.
That's hard to say, because there were a lot of times where I felt like giving up. I mean, when you go a whole week or 2 weeks without eating, or when you're basically trying to find a spot at a train station so you can sleep to make sure that you don't get stabbed in the middle of the night, you kind of forget what the point is of being alive. So I think somewhere along the line, I just kind of figure out I'm not the type of person that gives up. Not that I think there's anything wrong with people. Sometimes life is really hard to carry it on, but it's just, I guess, who I am. I always wanted to do what I'm doing, and I said I would do it, and I guess that's part of why I kept going.
Love it. And so we have a question first we have a very happy birthday coming to you from Kathy. Kathy Kerner wants to know, hold on a second here, let me find it. What your favorite crater or location on the moon is and why?
I think it's Tycho. I believe that's how you pronounce it.
You know what? So Will and I talk about that on live streams all the time, is neither one of us knows how to say it, and he's been doing virtual stuff as well as outreach for almost like 15 or 20 years now. He said, I still don't know how to say it correctly. I should probably Google it. We've never gotten around to doing that. And making
I have no idea. That's the thing. Also, when your first language is Spanish, like when you learn science in Spanish, that's what I'm doing now. I'm actually practicing science in Spanish because it's a whole other language. And since I never had it before, I only know it in English. And even some of the words, I'm like, did you say Tycho or Tycho? How do you pronounce that? And then people get really picky about that stuff, because one time I wrote moon with the small m, and I got a whole speech about it. A whole speech. I offended a whole community, apparently. Of course, and I was told by other friends in the space community that was nonsense. I mean, if you're writing a scientific paper, yeah, do it right. But
if it's a tweet, maybe you shouldn't be. People shouldn't be so upset about
okay. It. We forgive you.
Well, and I think that's a big thing on science communication too, is that so often we're so difficult on other people, and we're also very difficult on ourselves, is making sure that we get everything right. Punctuation in the headline of something can completely determine. There was something that came out a few months ago that was talking about all the full moons, and the way that it read, because it was talking about like the super moons and something else too. It was like the super moon and the full moon. I'm sorry, the super moon, the wolf moon, and something else. But the punctuation made it seem like there was going to be like 15 or 15 or 16 different full moons in the year. No, it was the blue moon. It was talking about the blue moons. And so they were talking about that and like, well, yeah, but what we're talking about is only like some of these are also the same thing. Like something is a super moon that's also going to be a full moon. Like they're the same thing. And it got really funny. If you've got to pay attention to that stuff, and it's stuff that we all try to do. But I think an important part is reminding people that, hey man, we're not perfect. We're gonna mess up from time to time. And sometimes we're putting, we love this stuff and we want to share it. And, we may misspell, Jovian or, astronomical from time to time. And we often make up words. We made up, what was it? Galastricism the other day by accident. We put asterism and galaxy together by accident. And that's just been a running joke that we've had for the last few days.
I think it's the tone. I mean, I'm all about the facts. So if people are putting the facts out there the way they're supposed to be, that's okay. If somebody makes an honest mistake, that's okay too. My problem is with misinformation. Like if we're gonna have a moon that's slightly bigger, and that's because of how we're seeing it or the perspective or whatever, or if it's closer for whatever actual scientific reason, then let's explain that. I like that they're getting people excited, but let's not be like, "Cool, we have the gazillion moon and blah blah blah." And you don't need to sensationalize. This stuff is really interesting on its own. But I think people, when they communicate science or whatever it is that they're talking about, they get a little too caught up and I know more than you do. And that's when the attitude comes up. And I don't think you can teach anyone anything by making fun of them. That's just not going to happen.
Yeah, let's politely correct each other and work with each other on it. Because the thing is that the more we learn, the more that we understand we don't understand anything. And that's one of the reasons that I think it's such a big thing. One of my favorite things about space is that every single day there's something new. We can go through the news and all the other stuff that's going on, and there's always a lot happening. But if you set up your Google alerts for, space news or astronomy news, every morning you are going to see something new that we have learned about the universe. And we don't have to exaggerate those things. It's cool enough the way it is. There's part of me that struggles with it a little bit because we get a whole ton of engagement and people that are interested in it when we say it's going to be a super wolf moon. Fair enough. But while we're at it, let's also educate and mention what and why. Like, here's what those things mean. It's only going to look a little bigger. It's going to look a little brighter. And this is a wolf moon means it's this type of year, blah, blah, blah. So that way they know, because people hear, I think those things are important too. If it's going to be out there, let's share what the truth of those things is.
I think if you remove the condescension from a lot of things, you can go a lot further with people. I'm a really good example of that. When I first started using Twitter, like I said, there was a lot of things that I didn't know. I kind of lived my life backwards. I did all the things that people do usually at my age now is what I did when I was younger, because I was trained for that. And then I left all of that. And now I'm doing the things that usually people do when they're younger. Like they go to college and they get married and whatever. I did all of that already. So there's a lot of terms and a lot of things that are still new to me. And one of the things I really don't like is when people say, you should know this. Or didn't they teach you that in high school? It's one of my favorite things to do when I tell people, did you know that at that time I was sleeping at a train station? Not everybody goes to high school at the same time, because people then they have to go back on their own perceptions and be like, wait a minute.
And that's an important thing that we, science is a very, especially the space industry, is a very accepting group of people once you get into it and you start really meeting the space family, space fam, as everybody's been calling it recently. Science communicators and space people have been really vital to what's been going on as we've been dealing with this the last few months. And I think that's such an important thing to dive into and discuss, is that it's important that we have voices from everywhere. And that's, it's important that we don't look down on those things, because the thing is, somebody says, you talk and say you're talking about a fandom of some sort, say Lord of the Rings. And when somebody says, oh, you haven't seen that, it immediately makes you feel guilty about the fact you haven't seen something everybody else has seen. But if you come at it as like, oh, I am so excited for you. Like, you don't really know that much about astronomy. You've never looked through a telescope. Let's go set this up so I can show you what Saturn looks like through a telescope, because it's going to change your mind. And the more that we try to attack it in that way, I think it's a really, really important thing. And it's something that, that I love that you're sharing with. And I know that obviously, your fandom continues to grow and people are following all the amazing things that you're doing, to the point now that you've been picked up and you've got a book on the way. So I gotta get some details on that, because I haven't got to talk to you about it yet.
So that was super funny and weird, because like that's another thing I also always mention. I grew up without books. I didn't have any books or access to books or whatever. And for me to be writing one is like, what? last year, late last year, I got contacted by an agent, and she was like, "Hey, like I've seen you around, and I think you're really cool. And would you be interested in writing books?" And I'm like, "Me?" And she's like, "Yeah, for school kids and on. We want you to write maybe a couple books. Maybe this one can be semi biographical about your life or something." And I was like, "Sure." I mean, that's great. That's all I can say about it. We don't have a title yet. I have to come up with the title, and I don't have a release date because I know they keep asking me that on interviews. I'm not there yet. But yeah, the whole thing has been wild. I'm just grateful on it, honestly. Like, that's one thing that Twitter did for me, the exposure. I exist now. And
You
for
always did, but
for
now
better,
people
yeah,
recognize
now
it.
people see it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
now people see it.
for better or worse, it's just, if I'm helping someone, that's all I care about, honestly. To hell with the cloud, no offense. I just want people to be happy. I'm happy now. I just want to spread that out.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the really great things about it. Again, it's something that so many people look down on all the time as on social media is the bad things about it, but there is just so much good that you can be done with it. I didn't have any idea that I would be able to be a science communicator, especially for the fact that similar to you, that this is relatively new to me. I was well into my 30s before I even knew that I had any interest in this whatsoever, and it came out of nowhere. But if this is something you're passionate about, there's a place for you. And there's so many different people. And one of the things that is really important that more and more people are doing is that we're starting to see science communication in different languages. Diana El Cindy had her on a few weeks ago. She's doing her posts are in both Arabic and in English. You share your website, especially is bilingual to be able to reach out to different people. So how important is that for you as well to make sure that the message you have is getting out to both groups of people that you obviously connect with?
Now I find it really important. I always just did it in English. That's one of the reasons actually why English started taking over my Spanish, because when I only spoke in Spanish, I dealt with a lot of prejudice. It's really hard to explain that when a person hasn't been in that position. It was really tough. So, and that's also why I mentioned the being Dominican, because we carry a lot of bias, like we're just assumed to not be intelligent, or and not from my country, just Latin America, like anywhere. We just assume to be a lot of things. And so I started doing my Instagram in Spanish also because I noticed that some people wanted to talk to me and they didn't know English. And they thought that, even on Twitter, sometimes people are like, "You know Spanish?" I'm like, "That's my first language." And they're like, "Whoa." So I started doing that. And hopefully my book, I wanted to be in Spanish also. And I just did an interview not long ago with Symmetry Magazine, which is a magazine about, I think it's physics and quantum mechanics and all that. And they wanted me to talk about the disadvantages and the advantages of physicists communicating in only one language. So we went over that a little bit.
That's and I think it's a wonderful thing that you're getting that out there to so many people in so many different ways. And so we've had a lot of wonderful comments for different people, and also so we have a bunch of different happy birthdays to you. Stephanie Walker says hola and happy birthday, Rose. Joan Marie, who is an incredible, I believe she's an engineer at Blue Origin. She says happy birthday as well. George Salazar, wonderful science and space ambassador, says awesome messages sharing your story. So there's a lot of people that are constantly inspired by your story, and you're really humble with sharing it. And actually, in a way, the one of the people that I've likened you to a few times is that Anthony Bourdain. Whenever Anthony Bourdain was younger, he had this really this incredible crazy life, and he just sat down one day to write a book, and then all of a sudden he was everywhere, and everybody was really kind of loving the message that he put out, because so many of us could relate to the fact that we hear so much about so many people in the space industry, and it kind of makes it look like they're these perfect people that never had a struggle. And you were somebody that loves to share that. So can you tell us a little bit about what you would want to say to people that are inspired by your story, and the advice that you would give them if they wanted to follow in your footsteps, maybe thinking that they can't do what it is that they love, and what you've so obviously done a great job at?
For the struggle, I would say the only reason why people like to hold that against you is because they had it easier. So don't let people do that to you. I used to be very embarrassed of everything about my life, and it got old, honestly. And that's, I guess, there you go. That's where my resilience came from.
Preach.
I got tired of people, thinking that they know where I came from or what I can and cannot do. So I noticed in science, that's a pretty predominant thing. And I'm a little bit of a black sheep in a lot of circles because of that, because not everything is pretty, not everything is nice, and it's okay to talk about it. And even though it's not okay to struggle, because no one should, you should also not be embarrassed because it's not your fault. These are consequences of the society that we live in, the circumstances, the way where you were born is really not on you. And just don't be ashamed. And if you love something, once you get anywhere near it, don't let anybody keep you from it. It's gonna be hard. I mean, once I started being out there, I started getting so much hate, and I'm always fascinated by that. Actually, in the beginning, it used to hurt me, and now I'm just fascinated because I was like, how can you hate someone for living their lives? Like, if you're not hurting anybody, live it up, and let everyone say whatever they want to say. Go out and live it. Do it.
I love that, and it's something that it's been very big for me as well. This is there's so many of us that don't come from what. It's funny, we used to look at things that the average family was going to be this perfect family, like it was the married with 2.5 kids and the white picket fence and all that stuff. And in the 90s, that started to change. Like we started realizing that just what they depict on TV and in books is not what the world is. It's so much diversity, and there's so many different voices to be heard, and it's important that we're connecting in as many ways as possible. And that's something that you are stellar at doing. And I think that's important that we, if you can do it in a way that connects with so many people, and you get to have a voice, and that's the really cool part about it, is that you have a voice that is your own, and you won't change that for anyone, and you shouldn't. And I think it's one of the reasons I really wanted to have you on today. So tell everybody where they can find you on social media, so that way they can follow all the amazing stories of what you're up to. And I know you got your first astronomy class coming up soon. I'm really excited for you for that.
Officially, yeah, I'm super excited about it,
because that's like some of my next classes are going to be my very first science classes. I got all this stuff out of the way, so I get to take my first chemistry and biology and astronomy courses once I go back to taking classes, and I'm so stoked about it. I know that you have to be too.
It's so funny to say that. When I said it the other day, it confused a lot of people when I say my first astronomy class, because I already have so much knowledge, and I've done so many things already that are related to space. And I was like, no, it's just that officially that's my first one. There's the physics and there's this everything else, but I've never actually been able to study astronomy as officially with ASU. So I'm very, very excited about it.
That's so awesome. And so give us your social media handles and your website and stuff, so that way people can follow along and keep up when we get that book title and all the good information.
Sure, that's _astro_nerd_. But for Instagram, the A and the N are not capital, and for Twitter they are. It's easier if you just go to my website, www.rosedf.net, because everything is in there. But yeah, that's it. I'm not too much all over the place, so you can find me pretty easily if you just write Rose DF. I'm gonna come up right away.
Pretty easy to find you. Rose, thank you so much for coming on today. And again, very happy birthday to you. I'm glad. A lot of people don't know that. Rose is actually feeling a little under the weather. She's been fighting the cold a little bit this week. And she's like, let's do it anyway. And that's why you're awesome. So I'm so glad that you came on to talk with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And so everybody, that's going to conclude this episode of the live version of the Space Foundation Space4U podcast. You can subscribe to our podcast and leave us a review on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, and on Google Play. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And of course, our website, www.spacefoundation.org, where you can also learn about the various ways you can support the Space Foundation. Don't forget to visit us on www.discoverspace.org for more digital content for teachers, parents, and students during this kind of unprecedented time. You can support the Space Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit, by visiting www.spacefoundation.org/donate. And on all these outlets and more, it's our goal to inspire, educate, connect, and advocate for the space community. Because of the Space Foundation, we will always have space for you. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We'll see you on the next episode next Tuesday.
Bye.